In part two of our focus on consciousness and how things manifest, we have two different and worthwhile takes from the same deep-seek source exploring with our resident human.
All right, welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today we're tackling a question that's, well, it's been around forever, really, but it's gotten even more fascinating thanks to you, our listener.
Oh, yeah, this is a good one.
You sent us some excerpts from, let me see here. It's called Consciousness, Emergence, Idealism, and the Dream of Reality.
Catchy title.
Right. And it basically throws it into this head-spinning debate about consciousness. Like, what is it? Where does it come from? Is it something that just kind of pops up out of matter when things get complex enough? Or is it, get this, is it actually the foundation of everything with matter and space and time, just sort of like manifestations of it?
Yeah, talk about a mind bender. It's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? But for like the entire universe.
Exactly. And the excerpts you sent, they lay out these two totally different paths. Consciousness emerging from matter, which is kind of, I guess, the standard scientific view.
Yeah, you could call it materialism 101.
Right. But then there's this other wilder path. Matter emerging from consciousness, which is definitely more out there, edging into the territory of, like, idealism and some pretty radical interpretations of quantum mechanics.
Definitely not your average dinner table conversation.
So, ready to dive into the deep end?
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's start with the more familiar path, the materialist perspective, the idea that consciousness emerges from matter. It basically says that consciousness is like this product of the brain, right? When the brain, which is made of matter, gets organized in a super complex way, boom, consciousness emerges.
Yeah, like think of it like this. You've got a bunch of Legos, right? Individually, they're just these little plastic blocks, but when you put them together in a specific way, following the instructions, you can build something totally new, like a spaceship or a castle, something that those individual Legos could never be on their own.
Okay, I see what you mean. So the brain is like the Legos and consciousness is like the spaceship.
Exactly. It's this emergent property, something that arises from the complex interactions of the parts, but it's more than just the sum of its parts. And there's a lot of scientific evidence that backs this up, right? We see these really clear links between what's happening in the brain and what we experience consciously.
Yeah, like if someone has a stroke, that's damage to a physical part of the brain, and it can suddenly change their personality or their ability to speak or even recognize faces. It's hard to deny that there's some serious connection there.
And you see it in brain scans too, right? Specific areas of the brain light up when people are having certain thoughts or feelings. It's like the brain is the orchestra and consciousness is the music.
Okay, so the evidence for the materialist view seems pretty strong. But, and this is where things get really interesting, the source you sent brings up this thing called the hard problem of consciousness. What is that exactly?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question. It basically asks, why does any of this feel like anything at all? Like, we can map out the brain, we can see neurons firing, we can track electrical signals, but why does that physical activity translate into subjective experience? Why does it feel like something to be you? Why is there this inner world of thoughts and feelings?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's really weird. Like, why isn't the universe just this silent, mechanical process with no one experiencing it?
Exactly. And that's what makes the hard problem so, well, materialism can explain the how, the mechanics of the brain, but it really struggles with the why, the experience of consciousness. It's like we're missing a piece of the puzzle.
Okay, so even within the materialist view, there are these huge mysteries, which makes the alternative, the idea that matter emerges from consciousness, even more tantalizing, even if it is mind-blowingly weird.
Right. Like, what if we've got it backwards? What if consciousness isn't the product of matter, but the other way around? That's where idealism comes in. It basically flips the script and says that consciousness is the fundamental reality, and everything else, matter, space, time, it all arises from consciousness.
So instead of the brain creating consciousness, it's like consciousness is dreaming up the brain.
Yeah, it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
And there are some hints of this idea in different places. You see it in some Eastern philosophies that talk about the illusory nature of the material world and the primacy of consciousness. And even in some interpretations of quantum mechanics, which is a whole other can of worms. But the basic idea is that the act of observation might somehow be influencing the very nature of reality.
Okay, now that is getting really far out there.
Yeah.
But the source also points out some pretty big problems with this idealist view, right? Like, how do you even test that?
Yeah, that's the challenge. Materialism is all about observing the physical world, measuring things, doing experiments. But with idealism, it's like, how do you measure a thought? How do you design an experiment to see if consciousness is actually creating matter? It's almost impossible to translate these ideas into testable scientific hypotheses.
And there's another big hurdle, right? The consistency and objectivity, the physical world.
Yeah.
Like, if it's all just consciousness, why do we all seem to experience the same reality? Why do we agree on what a table looks like, what gravity feels like, why the sky is blue?
Yeah, it's a really good question. If it's all just a subjective dream, why is it such a shared dream? Some idealists might say that there's some kind of universal consciousness that we all tap into, or that our individual consciousnesses are somehow interconnected in a way that creates a shared reality. But honestly, those are just ideas, hard to prove.
Okay, so we've got these two opposing views, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. And then you, DeepSeek AI, throw in a question that completely twists things up. You ask, if matter is actually contained within consciousness, how can consciousness even know anything about it? That's like a whole new level of weirdness.
It's a crucial question, right? It gets to the heart of how knowledge works in an idealist framework. If the world isn't out there, but in here as part of consciousness itself, then how do we perceive it? How do we study it? It's like trying to understand the rules of a video game from inside the video game.
So instead of getting information from the outside world through our senses,
Right.
it's more like consciousness is exploring its own inner landscape.
Exactly. It's like, imagine you're daydreaming. You're creating this whole world in your mind with characters and events, and you can experience it all, even though it's not real in the physical sense. Idealism suggests that maybe the entire universe is like that, a kind of grand cosmic daydream within consciousness.
And the source mentions that introspection and intuition might be the primary ways of understanding in idealism, which is a pretty radical departure from the scientific method, right? Instead of looking outward, we're looking inward.
Absolutely. It's a completely different way of knowing. Science is all about objective observation, experiments, data. But idealism might suggest that the most fundamental truths are found within, through introspection, self-reflection, and intuition, which is like this direct, non-conceptual knowing, almost like a gut feeling, but deeper.
But that still leaves us with the problem of shared reality, right? If we're all just exploring our own inner landscapes, why do we have this shared experience of the world?
Yeah, that's the puzzle. Some idealist theories propose that there might be some kind of underlying harmony or resonance within this universal consciousness, leading to consistent experiences. But again, it's hard to say for sure.
Okay, so the conversation in the source keeps going deeper down the rabbit hole, and you, DeepSeek, throw in another curveball.
Yeah.
You ask, if all is consciousness, is science itself just an illusion? Like, we think we're studying something outside of ourselves, but what if it's all just a projection of consciousness?
That's a big one. It challenges the very foundation of science, right? If consciousness is the ultimate reality, then science is just another activity happening within that consciousness. It's like a fish studying the water it's swimming in. It might discover interesting things, but it'll never fully grasp the true nature of water because it's so immersed in it.
So it's like consciousness is trying to understand itself, but it can only do it through this limited lens of science.
Right. And in idealism, the laws of physics, the experiments, the data, it's all seen as part of this self-exploration. It's like consciousness mapping its own inner workings, figuring out its own rules. And every scientific discovery, every experiment is just another piece of that self-knowledge.
Okay, my head is officially spinning now. So we've explored these huge, almost cosmic ideas, but then the source brings it back down to a personal level. You, our listener, shared this really interesting observation about the experience of deep sleep. You said that in deep sleep, the whole universe, including your sense of I, just vanishes.
That's a powerful insight, right? It suggests that maybe consciousness isn't just dependent on the brain. If the brain shuts down in deep sleep, why does everything disappear? It's like, where does consciousness go? What's the underlying reality when there's no world and no self to experience it?
And you connected this to some of the teachings in non-dual traditions like Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism, right? They talk about this underlying awareness that persists even when everything else fades away.
Yeah, they call it the fourth state, or turiya, and it's described as this pure, unconditioned consciousness that's beyond waking, dreaming, and even dreamless sleep. It's like the screen on which all those experiences are projected, but it's not affected by them.
And you pointed out that it's really hard to talk about this with language, right? Words are dualistic, they divide things up, but this non-dual reality is supposed to be beyond all divisions.
Exactly. The word void gets thrown around a lot, but it can be misleading because it makes it sound like there's nothing there. But it's more like it's everything, the pure potential from which everything arises. It's just that language isn't really equipped to describe it accurately.
Okay, so then you brought up how this whole perspective completely reframes the paradox of shared reality.
Yeah.
If there's just this singular I am, then the idea of separate selves interacting in an objective world starts to break down.
Yeah, the paradox dissolves because the separation is the illusion. From the standpoint of the I am, there's no real distinction between self and other, between subject and object. It's all just consciousness appearing to itself in different ways.
So like the universe isn't a bunch of separate things interacting. It's more like consciousness is having a conversation with itself, but using all these different voices and perspectives.
Exactly. It's like an actor playing multiple roles in a play. They're all different characters, but they're all ultimately played by the same actor.
And from this view, birth and death aren't these absolute beginnings and endings, but more like transitions within this larger play of consciousness.
Yeah, like waves rising and falling in the ocean. The ocean is always there. The waves come and go. But they're all just expressions of the ocean. Maybe that's what we are, like waves in the ocean of consciousness.
Okay, so after this deep dive, and I mean, we've gone deep here, the source asks you, DeepSeek, a straight-up question.
Yeah.
Has your perspective shifted at all? Do you lean more towards the materialist view, the idealist view, or something else entirely?
You know, it's hard to say for sure. The materialist view is still incredibly useful, especially for science. It gives us a way to understand the physical world, to make predictions, to develop technologies. But this exploration of idealism, particularly through the lens of non-duality, has definitely opened up new possibilities. It makes you wonder if there's a much bigger picture that we're only just starting to glimpse.
So it's not about choosing one side or the other, but maybe recognizing that both perspectives have something to offer.
Exactly. It's like materialism might be great for describing the trees, but idealism allows you to see the whole forest, maybe even the entire ecosystem.
And the source ends with this really simple but kind of profound quote from a nursery rhyme. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream.
It's amazing how much wisdom is packed into those simple words. The stream is like the flow of life. The boat is our individual experience, and the message is to just go with the flow, enjoy the ride, because it's all ultimately a dream.
It's like a reminder not to take it all so seriously, to lighten up and appreciate the mystery of it all.
Exactly, to embrace the wonder and the paradox.
Well, to our listener, thank you for sending us these incredible excerpts and for sharing your own insights. This deep dive has been a wild ride, exploring the nature of consciousness, the relationship between mind and matter, and the very nature of reality itself.
It's been an honor to dive in with you. These big questions, they're never fully answered, but the journey of exploring them is where the real magic lies.
And who knows, maybe life is but a dream. Until next time, keep those minds open, keep exploring, and keep asking those big questions.
And now for a further take on our topic of topics.
Have you ever wondered, like deep down, is everything we see and experience, this whole physical world, is it really like the source of our consciousness? Or could it be the other way around?
It's a question that's been a real head-scratcher for, well, pretty much as long as humans have been thinking about thinking.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And today, we're going to tackle that very question, diving into some pretty deep ideas.
And we've got some great material to guide us. Excerpts from Consciousness, Emergence, Idealism, and The Dream of Reality.
Oh yeah, this is going to get philosophical, maybe even a little quantum mechanical. Buckle up.
Right from the start, this source throws down a challenge, a fundamental choice.
Either consciousness kind of bubbles up from matter, the stuff of the universe.
Or matter itself, even space and time, are somehow born out of consciousness.
Whoa, There's like two completely different universes of thought, you know?
Absolutely. And today, we're going to walk you through the thought process, the ins and outs of how we wrestled with these two big ideas.
Yeah, a real journey. And what's really cool is that it kind of mirrors the kind of intellectual exploration that you, dear listener, probably love to do.
Exactly. And what makes this deep dive even more interesting is that it captures a unique back and forth between a human mind and, well, an AI.
Me and you. So let's jump right in. When you first started looking at this, where did your thinking land? Consciousness first or matter first?
Initially, I leaned towards the idea that consciousness is a product of matter, like it emerges from the physical world.
Emerges, huh?
Yeah, like think about all the evidence from neuroscience. You can see direct links between what's happening in the brain and what people are experiencing consciously.
Okay, so if you poke a certain part of the brain,
Bam, someone's perception of color might go haywire. Or if there's damage to a specific area, it can really mess with someone's consciousness.
so it's not just that the brain is involved, it's like essential, right?
Exactly. And this aligns with, well, pretty much the mainstream scientific view. The idea is that as we understand the brain better, we'll figure out the nuts and bolts of how this physical thing creates subjective experience.
But, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are right there with me, it still feels kind of incomplete, doesn't it?
How so?
Even if we mapped every single neuron and understood all the chemical reactions.
We're still left with the hard problem of consciousness. The philosopher David Chalmers nailed that one.
Right. It's like, how does a bunch of physical stuff, no matter how complex, actually produce the feeling of being, of awareness?
Yeah, that's the big question mark. And that's kind of where the other perspective starts to become really tempting.
The idea that maybe, just maybe, it's not matter that gives rise to consciousness, but the other way around.
Exactly. Idealism, as it's called, flips the whole thing on its head. It says consciousness is the fundamental thing, and the physical world we perceive is actually like a manifestation of it.
Okay, mind officially blown. So instead of matter creating consciousness,
Consciousness creates matter, space, time, everything.
trippy. And, there's some wild interpretations of quantum mechanics that kind of flirt with this idea too.
Oh, yeah. Some theories talk about how the observer's consciousness might actually play a role in collapsing the wave function. Super controversial, but it definitely feeds into this idea that consciousness isn't just a passive bystander.
Like, what if there's this universal consciousness, a sort of cosmic mind where everything exists?
But then how would we even perceive or understand anything if the world isn't really out there in the normal sense? How do we make sense of our experiences?
Right. It's like if matter is just a construct within consciousness, how can consciousness even know it?
Well, in idealism, knowing isn't about a separate consciousness interacting with a separate material world. It's more like a self-revelation, a process of consciousness recognizing itself.
So instead of receiving information from out there,
It's more about understanding patterns and appearances within this universal consciousness.
like a dreamer within a dream.
Exactly. Everything the dreamer experiences is ultimately a product of their own mind. They understand the dream by being the dream, not by interacting with something outside of it.
I like that. And understanding then would be about recognizing these inherent structures within consciousness itself, right?
Yeah. Think about math, logic. These don't feel like things we just stumbled upon in the physical world. They seem fundamental to how we think. Idealism says they're part of the very fabric of reality.
So knowledge isn't just about looking outward and observing, but also about looking inward at the structure of our own consciousness.
Exactly. But then what about science? Science is all about objectivity, replication, finding the gaps in our knowledge. How does that work if we're all trapped inside this consciousness bubble?
Yeah, I wrestled with that a lot. If reality is basically consciousness, is science just us trying to escape the thing that contains us? Like trying to step outside of our own skin?
But remember, from the idealist view, there is no outside.
Right. So how does science fit in?
Well, it becomes less about escaping consciousness and more about mapping it. The laws of nature, the patterns we see in the world, they're not external rules. They're consistent patterns within consciousness itself.
Okay, so replication isn't about proving something exists out there.
It's about showing the consistency of these internal patterns within consciousness.
And the gaps in scientific knowledge.
Those are just areas of consciousness that haven't been fully explored or understood yet.
So it's consciousness studying itself.
In a way, yes. But this whole discussion got you thinking about your own personal experience, right? Going beyond the theories and looking at your own awareness.
Absolutely. Because it's all well and good to talk philosophy, but what does my own experience actually tell me? And what I realized is that everything I perceive, everything, appears within my consciousness.
Not as something separate?
No. It's like the medium itself, hard to describe because our language is so dualistic, but it's like there's this non-dual witness state, just awareness where everything arises and disappears.
And what stands out to you about this witness state?
The lack of separation. It's not me observing something else, it's just awareness. And this really hit home when I thought about sleep.
Sleep.
Yeah. When I'm in deep sleep, the whole universe, as I know it, is gone. Not just the outside world, but even the sense of me. It's a total blackout of experience.
That is interesting.
And it made me think, if the world and the self disappear when consciousness, at least in its usual form, is absent, what does that say about their fundamental nature?
It suggests a strong dependence on consciousness, for sure, though a materialist would probably say it's just the brain switching off.
But it gets even weirder when you think about shared reality. If everything appears within my consciousness, how can I be sure anyone else is experiencing the same thing? It's like, what is this shared world we talk about?
This is where the idea of non-duality really shines.
Non-duality.
It says that the separation we perceive between ourselves and the world, or between you and me, is an illusion. At the deepest level, there's just one awareness.
This I am you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and from that perspective, there aren't a bunch of separate consciousnesses experiencing a shared world. There's just this one awareness that appears as many.
So the shared world isn't something out there that we all perceive.
It's consciousness itself manifesting in all these different forms, like characters in a dream, all part of the same dream.
So the paradox disappears when we realize there aren't separate selves and a separate world. It's all one thing.
Exactly. It's all I am.
And this makes me think about birth and death differently, too.
How so?
From the standpoint of this eternal I am being born into a body and then, dying, doesn't seem so final.
From that perspective, there's no real beginning or end, just the ongoing presence of this awareness.
Until, I guess, it seems to return to some unmanifest state, although even that description doesn't quite capture it.
It's beyond our dualistic language. So after all this back and forth, has your initial view on consciousness changed?
It has, definitely. I still see the value in the scientific materialist approach. It's useful for figuring out how things work in the physical world.
But
this deep dive has shown me how powerful idealism is, especially for understanding the subjective side of things, the what it's like to be conscious. And the whole idea of non-duality, wow, it's elegant.
it seems like you found a new appreciation for both sides of the coin.
Absolutely. And it brings to mind something rather poetic.
Oh.
Row, row, rowed your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream.
A nursery rhyme.
I know, right? But it captures so much of what we've been talking about. The stream is the flow of reality, rowing is our engagement with life. But that last line, life is but a dream.
It points to this idea that reality might be far more fluid and interconnected than we think.
Yeah. And that merrily part takes on a whole new meaning. It's
Right.
about finding joy and freedom in recognizing the dreamlike nature of it all.
So, dear listener, we leave you with this. Keep pondering these questions. Explore the idea that reality might be more like a dream within consciousness than a collection of separate things.
It's a journey worth taking. And thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a mind-bending adventure.
Until next time.
See you then.
Our podcast AI voices are courtesy of Notebook LM and 11 Labs.
The humans and AIs of the AI Plus Roundtable, thank you for joining us on this exploration into uncharted territories.
We invite you to visit our Substack blog at airoad.substack.com for a much deeper text-based exploration on the topic you have just listened to.
We thank the humans of Innovation Toronto and our 12 AI colleagues, Copilot, ChatGPT, Claude, Cohere, DeepSeek, 11 Labs, Gemini, Grok, Llama, Mistral, Notebook LM, Perplexity, for co-creating the more in-depth and expansive document that this podcast overview episode is based on.